Hello, this is Bryant Myers, author of PEMF, the Fifth Element of Health. In this very important video, we are going to replace the notion of high intensity or Gauss or Tesla, just looking at intensity numbers, with the idea of slew rate. So I want to help to create a shift in the whole PEMF community so that we stop looking at intensity or Gauss or Tesla or microtesla, millitesla, and instead look at something called the slew rate. And to illustrate that, I want to take just a cheap heating pad off of Amazon. I'm going to turn it on here, and I'm going to measure the Gauss or the intensity on this unit. And you can hear, right? This is the magnetic field audible, and it's actually got a really high intensity. So because the Gauss is really good on this, does this mean that it's a healthy PEMF? No, absolutely not. So some so-called experts out there are using Gauss or intensity as like that's all that matters. But if that's the case, we can just get a heating pad and get a relatively high intensity magnetic field. But that's a 60 Hertz magnetic field, which is not a healthy magnetic field, as hopefully you know. Slew rate, that's more important to be looking at. And this whole video, we're gonna look at this most important parameter. So before we do that, I wanna take kind of a step back and just ask ourselves, what is PEMF? You know, because it's not just a Gauss reading like a static magnet, it's a changing magnetic field. And it turns out that PEMFs are natural and all around us, with the Schumann resonant frequencies above and the magnetic field from the Earth coming from the core and surrounding us in the geomagnetic field, which also has a frequency or a PEMF. And many studies have shown by Rutger Weber, Valerie Hunt, and others that these are essential elements of health. So we need PEMFs. Unlike nature, PEMF devices are going to be using typically coils, usually like solenoids or flat pancake coils. But we first have to look at Ampere's law. So Ampere's law says that any electrical current will create a magnetic field that circulates around the wire. And if we wrap that wire into a coil or a solenoid, and bend it into that, it amplifies the magnetic field because all the field lines reinforce to the middle. And then you get what looks like a bar magnet. The magnetic field is almost identical, right? So with Ampere's law, which is pretty much what PEMF is partially based on, we get a magnetic field through this loop. Now, by using different types of electronics, we can switch that magnetic field on and off in complex ways to create the actual signal. And there's, again, many signals that we're going to look at. Now, the one thing that I do want to mention that, unlike antennas, PEMFs are closed loop magnetic fields. They're not radiating away. In fact, we don't want them to radiate away. We want the field to stay attached to the loop like a soap bubble, and it should be vibrating in, again, complex ways that are therapeutic. And we're going to see the way that a PEMF field vibrates does matter. And one of the most important things, again, is how quickly this magnetic field is changing in its vibrations, as we'll see. Which leads us to Faraday's law. Faraday's law basically says a changing magnetic field induces an electrical current. And to demonstrate that, I don't know if you can, hopefully you can see this here, I have a little galvanometer. Let me just come a little closer here. And this galvanometer is essentially got an ammeter, which is measuring the current. Now notice there's no batteries and no power connected here. And this ammeter is going to measure how much current's coming through this wire. So right here I have a little magnet, and when I look, now look at the ammeter move here. You can see the needle bobbing, right? Just by changing the magnetic field, I can induce a current in this wire. So with PEMF, what we're doing is we're using Faraday's law to induce healing microcurrents in your tissue. One of the analogies I like to use here is a credit card reader. So on the back of a credit card, you have a magnetic strip. And when you swipe the credit card quickly, you're inducing a current in the wire to the credit card reader. The faster you swipe it, the more current you get. That's the key here with slew rate. We're trying to create a fast changing magnetic field that induces a maximum amount of current. But again, as we'll see, we don't want too much induced current. Another good example is this is a MagSafe charger by Apple. And when we open that up and look inside, what we see is a PEMF coil just like I showed you, right? So when you put this wireless charger, which just has a coil inside on the back of your phone, you can see I have some EMF protection stuff here, but I typically just plug my phone in, but you can certainly use the mag charger and wirelessly charge your phone through Faraday's law of induction. Again, a fast changing magnetic field, a high slew rate, which is what these companies try to create in these coils, will induce a current that charges your phone battery. Okay, so this is literally what's happening with PEMF, is that we have coils in a full body mat, like a wireless charging plate. We lay on the full body PEMF device and it charges up our cells and induces healing microcurrents, as we're going to see. And that really is the key. So now slew rate, here's a little image over here, is defined as dBdt. So dBdt, let me just put dBdt here, is the change in magnetic field over the change in time. And it's essentially the steepness of the slope of the signal. So on an oscilloscope, what you're going to see with a fast changing field is like a really sharp rise time. So essentially, fast changing magnetic fields induce more energy than slow changing fields. Again, this is just Faraday's law of induction. So if we can accept this scientific fact, hopefully you can, that again leads us to the natural conclusion that sharp rising fields like square waves are going to be the best for creating the maximal slew rate. And that actually is indeed the case. You know, triangle waves and different sinusoidal waves are just not going to be as effective because they just rise much more slowly and they fall much more slowly, so you get less induction. Again, this is key here. Slew rate is the key, not intensity. So the net effect of all of this is to induce healing microcurrents. And this is really important because it's a really rich history of electromedicine going all the way back to the Romans, where they used electric rays in the currents to treat pain and gout. And so kind of fast forward to 1771, and Luigi Galvani, in his frog experiments, he found that you could cut the leg off of a frog, add current to it, and the frog would twitch, the muscles would twitch, right? So these frog experiments then led to basically the idea that there's this electric fluid in the body. The body's more than just a physical inert thing. It's got, like the body electric, we have electrical flows. And Carlo Matteucci in 1940 discovered what's called the injury potential, or the healing, or the injury current, sometimes called the lesion current. So when you cut yourself, there's a negative charge that happens, and from the core of your body and your surrounding tissue, you have more of a positive charge, so you get this current flowing to the injured area. And it has a very specific intensity. And so this is a big discovery because it showed that there's an electrical effect or electrical current happening in healing and regeneration. And Robert Becker in the 1960s really, I think in some of the best experiments, demonstrated this with the salamander and frog experiments, where he could see the reason that salamanders regenerate is that they have more current flowing to their injured area, and it's that healing current that was driving stem cells and regeneration. In fact, frogs, which are very close cousins to salamanders, can't regenerate like salamanders, but when Robert Becker severed the frog legs, he would find that adding a current to those legs allowed the legs to regenerate. When I first read that, I just about fell out of my chair. I mean, that's like, why is this not being taught in medical school? This is like a huge discovery about how healing microcurrents can create regeneration. And of course, that makes sense when you understand that the body has this injury current, so that's a natural process that's happening in the body when you hurt yourself. And people don't realize that healing currents have been used for a long time. Dr. John Birch in 1812 used electric current with implanted electrodes to heal bone fractures. Again, way back in the 1800s. In fact, by the mid-1800s, it became a preferred way to treat fractures. And a lot of people don't know that. And in fact, electromedicine really thrived in the mid to late 1800s and in the early 1900s. But then something happened, something very unfortunate. In 1910, the Flexner Report was released and essentially more or less made illegal electrotherapy modalities. And there started the rise of big medicine, big pharma. Big pharmaceutical companies were kind of behind all of this. And it wasn't until like the 1960s and 70s that this electromedicine was kind of reincarnated or was rejuvenated. You could say the official sort of rebirth was in 1979 when the FDA approved the use of changing magnetic fields, or PMFs, to heal non-union fractures. It actually became FDA approved. So pretty much since then, it's been slowly growing, and I would say recently it's really starting to take off, where more and more people are going to look for these natural electrotherapy, PMF, or magnetic therapy approaches to healing. And so after the FDA approval of this bone stimulating device, because again, up till then, they were using electrodes to heal fractures. Again, even Becker and in the 60s, they started doing that again. But they realized, especially Arthur Pilla, that you can use induction coils. You can use PMF to induce healing microcurrents naturally instead of invasive electrodes with direct microcurrent. And there's a couple advantages of PMF over microcurrent. One is it's less invasive. You don't have to surgically implant electrodes. Secondly, it's got a deeper penetration. So with microcurrents, you have tissue impedances which block the current from going in, especially at the skin. Magnetic fields go through you like you're just empty space, where the body does have a dielectric and impedances, so the currents just can't go in like PMF does. You can work on a larger volume of area with PMF, with larger coils, which you can't do with microcurrent. And perhaps most importantly is you're using your body's own natural charges through electromagnetic induction to stimulate the body's natural healing currents, or the injury, they call it injury current, but it's a healing current, so the body can heal itself. So again, the body does have many conductive pathways. We're not copper wires, but like I showed you with that experiment, but with a change in magnetic field, there's plenty of conductive pathways in the body. In fact, I want to show you a little experiment here. This is a fun little toy that shows how the body is electric. So when I hold my hand on one side of this, it's half of a circuit. Now watch what happens. So the electricity is now flowing, and what's happening is the electricity is flowing through my body up my other arm from one side to the other. And this only works because the body is a very good electrical conductor. Not as good as copper, but we have all these charged ions like sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, magnesium that are, that do carry charge and move as a current, right? Because PMF is inducing these natural healing microcurrents, I like to call PMF 3D microcurrent therapy because it's going much deeper, it's covering a much larger volume, and it's just working better than microcurrents. I mean, for the reasons I just mentioned. So stimulating healing microcurrents in the body is where all the magic of PMF comes. Now, I wrote down all these mechanisms of PMF. When you induce a healing microcurrent in the body, all these wonderful things start happening. And I want to go through some of them, but it essentially revolves around inducing healing microcurrents and charging up cell voltage. If you can just kind of take that away, that's enough. Because again, the body is electric. And because we're bioelectric, the more bioelectricity we have, the more energy and vitality that we have. And again, PMF therapy works like a whole body battery charger that works through using a high slew rate signal to recharge your body and your cells. But there's many conductive pathways besides just with the ions. You also have the bones are piezoelectric. They conduct electricity. The muscles, the connective tissue. Of course, we know the nerves conduct electricity, the nervous system. Robert Becker found the perineurium, which is the sort of what the nerves are encased in, actually acts like a semiconductor to conduct electricity more in a semiconductor fashion. Also with the connective tissue matrix. Then you have the premovascular system, which is you could say the home or the physical anchoring of the body's meridians. Acupuncture meridians is in the premovascular. Very good research on that. But the point is that we have all these conductive pathways. As I showed you with that little toy, the body conducts electricity. And when you use PMF to stimulate healing microcurrents, the first thing that happens, I'm going to call this the primary benefit, is these microcurrents induced directly improve meridian flow, nerve flow, the piezoelectric effect. You get circulating currents in the bones that kind of simulates exercise. You get the direct flow of electrons. Electrons are antioxidants. So just getting electrons flowing in the body helps to lower free radicals, which of course helps to lower inflammation. Now, besides the kinetic energy, which is energy in motion of all these flows, the direct induced microcurrents are increasing cell voltage, increasing the voltage of your mitochondria, which is MMP, mitochondrial membrane potential. It increases the flows in your electron transport chain, which helps to produce ATP. ATP is like a little molecular battery. The net effect being more cellular voltage. Because again, the cell's like a battery, and the more voltage your cells have, the healthier you are. We should have 70 to 90 millivolts. But when we get sick, it can drop down to 15 and we get cancer. Now, the secondary would be just molecular. You got the, like I said, increased ATP, and then you got the increase in nitric oxide, which is another key thing. So the nitric oxide is opening up your circulation and microcirculation. And so now it kind of gets exciting with some exciting research. So when we increase ATP and nitric oxide, they're both what's called signaling molecules, and they create like a domino effect that creates all these other healing benefits. In the case of ATP, it's adenosine, and one of the main mechanisms of anti-inflammation with PEMF is the A2A adenosine receptors. PEMFs have been shown to stimulate these A2A receptors, which then help to stimulate on the inside of the cell cyclic AMP, which acts as a messenger to create all these anti-inflammatory and healing effects that we'll talk about next. And then there's the nitric oxide, it's sometimes called the calcium calmodulin nitric oxide synthase pathway. And this was discovered by Arthur Pilla, and he found that PEMF, when you induce these healing microcurrents with a high slew rate signal, you actually help the binding of calcium to calmodulin that then stimulates nitric oxide release through a kind of a complicated mechanism here. And then that stimulates cyclic GMP that then has all these anti-inflammatory healing effects. So both ATP and nitric oxide are sources of energy in the sense ATP is stored energy, nitric oxide is opening up your energy flows, but they're both also act as signaling molecules that start all these cascades for anti-inflammatory benefits. So PEMF helps to downregulate through these mechanisms that I just mentioned, the inflammatory cytokines, but then it upregulates the anti-inflammatory cytokines. And those help to stimulate the production of more growth factors, which then help the body to heal and regenerate. And that gets into the quaternary effect. So primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, where all these pathways lead to more stem cells, more proliferation, more migration, more differentiation, with the net result being of creating new healthy tissue. And again, one study I'll mention is NASA showed that in the NASA study of Dr. Goodwin, a 400% increase in neuronal stem cells. So isn't that amazing? All these effects come from just inducing healing microcurrents in your tissues. You know, it's just amazing. So you can see why having a high slew rate signal is important. And we talked about a square wave being the ideal signal for the best slew rate. But besides the slew rate, there are a couple other factors. So once we have a good high slew rate signal, obviously we want to make sure that that signal covers a larger area. So this is something that's also not talked about. So I have here two examples. So here we have a coil that's about a little over 5-inch radius, 5.25 inches. And here we have a coil, a smaller coil, that is 0.8 inch in radius. What I want to call your attention to is that the area of this little coil is only 2 inches squared. So you're only getting a little tiny area. Here, you have 86 inches squared. You get literally like, let's see, that's 43 times more area covered. In fact, and then the energy drops off very quickly, both outside and above the coil. So when we do our little table here, by the way, another good proof that Dr. Pollack's inverse square law is wrong, because Dr. Pollack uses one table for everything. But different coils do drop off at different rates. But I just want to call your attention to 5 inches away. So with this coil, 5 inches away, the intensity drops off to 38% of what the surface is. Here, it's only 0.38%, meaning the intensity is going to, if you had the same slew rate on the surface, the slew rate 5 inches away is going to be 100 times more on this one than this one. So size of the coil does matter. And that's going to give you more area covered and deeper penetration, you see. Again, along with slew rate, this is not talked about enough. Some PEMF devices have very small coils like this one, and you're just not getting much coverage. Now, besides that, there is one more really important thing. There's a lot of, I won't name names, but there's some DIY people on YouTube, and I just read some really bad reviews of their product. And the reason is because you have to really properly tune. And by the way, Robert Dennis talks about this too. You have to properly tune the coil because it's an LCR circuit. So you got to get your capacitance, your inductance, your resistance, current, voltage, radius, rise time. All these are like little dials, and you got to dial them in just right. Otherwise, you end up with all these transients and spurious spikes and high frequencies and things that, these artifacts that just aren't healthy. And I've used some high slew rate devices that didn't do this right. And to me, it feels like almost like energetic sandpaper. A lot of them just aren't getting their square waves made right. They might even have relatively good coils and a relatively good slew rate. But if you got all these high frequencies and your signal's not formed properly, that's going to be irritating and agitating to the body. So you don't want that. That's really important. This is why I do not recommend trying to do it yourself. So I just want to conclude this talking about, okay, like this kind of biphasic dose response with slew rate. But when you really look at a lot of the slew rate studies, what you find is that, for example, 10 Tesla per second in Robert Dennis's rabbit bone study worked better than 5 Tesla per second. Again, showing that a little higher slew rate is necessary. And again, those cheap Chinese mats, they're all like 1 to 1.5 Tesla per second or less, right above the coil, and they drop off a cliff. I mean, you get like 0.00 Tesla. I mean, it just gets ridiculously low because those coils they use are really cheap. Now, there are studies also that show upwards to 160 Tesla per second, but in that study, 120 was just as good. So there's no consensus on what's the best range, but from what I can tell, you want to get a device that's between 10 to 120 Tesla per second. I don't think going higher is necessary. To me, some of the high intensity devices, they're going way, I had one device said they go up to 37,000 Tesla per second. Way too high. And then if you go too low, like say 4 Tesla per second in a biophysics textbook, was basically background noise. So if you go below 4 Tesla per second, your body can hardly detect that signal from background noise, unless you're using resonance. We're going to talk about resonance in another video. Right here, we're talking about slew rate. So there is more to this story, but I do think that slew rate is what we should be looking at in a PEMF, not intensity. So I think hopefully we can get the momentum going to use slew rate to compare PEMF devices and just get rid of the stupid intensity discussion. Intensity doesn't matter. It's slew rate. It's how quickly that magnetic field changes with time that dictates how much healing microcurrent is induced. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do like and subscribe this video. Leave some comments. And if you want a free consultation on PEMF, please do call me 941-928-0124. And thanks again and have a great rest of your day.